Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have to admit, I never expected Valentin to be the character who would hit me right in the heart this week. After everything we've watched him do over the years, I thought I had him figured out. But that farewell with Charlotte changed the way I see him completely. Sitting there watching those scenes, I wasn't thinking about the ruthless Cassadine who once terrorized Port Charles. I was watching a father trying to give his daughter one final lesson about courage, even while facing the possibility that he may never see her again. As we say here in America, that one really got me. What makes this story so powerful is how far Valentin has come. I still remember when he first arrived in Port Charles like a storm nobody saw coming. This was a man who took innocent people hostage, shot Nicholas, nearly destroyed countless lives, and seemed determined to prove he was the most dangerous member of a family already famous for producing villains. Back then, redemption felt impossible for him. If someone had told me that one day I'd feel sympathy for Valentin, I probably would have laughed and said they were dreaming. The interesting thing is that his transformation didn't happen overnight. That's what makes it believable to me. Little by little, the rough edges started to soften. His love for Nina revealed parts of him that had been buried for years. Then Charlotte entered his life and brought out something even more important. For all his mistakes, Valentin loved his daughter fiercely. You could see that every time he fought for her, worried about her, or tried to protect her from the consequences of his own choices. For me, the biggest turning point came when Anna became part of his life. Around her, Valentin seemed to stop fighting the world for the first time. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was trying to become someone better. It wasn't a perfect journey, and he certainly made plenty of mistakes along the way, but that's exactly why this redemption story feels earned. Real people don't change overnight. They stumble, fall, and sometimes hurt the people they love before finally finding a better path. Now, watching Valentin risk everything and even sacrifice himself to save Jocelyn, I can't help thinking about how different this man is from the one who first arrived in Port Charles. The old Valentin would have put himself first. The man we see today is making choices that could cost him everything. And when that sacrifice is paired with such a heartbreaking goodbye to Charlotte, it becomes impossible not to see how much he has changed. The farewell itself carried a weight that stayed with me long after the episode ended. There was no manipulation, no scheming, and no hidden agenda. It felt like a father trying to leave his daughter with enough strength to face whatever comes next. Those moments reminded me that sometimes redemption isn't about being forgiven by everyone. Sometimes it's about becoming the person your child can be proud of, even if it's far too late to erase the mistakes of the past. When I look back at Valentin's journey, I honestly think the scenes surrounding Steinmauer may have been some of the most important moments in his entire story. What struck me wasn't just the fact that he ended up in prison. We've seen plenty of characters locked up over the years. What made this different was the feeling that Valentin had reached a crossroads in his life. For so long, he was a man who manipulated situations, stayed 3 steps ahead of everyone else, and always found a way to escape the consequences of his actions. Yet there he was, facing a future where he couldn't rely on his intelligence, his connections, or another elaborate plan. I remember watching those episodes and thinking that this was the first time Valentin truly looked exhausted by the life he had built. The old fire was still there, but it was mixed with regret, something we rarely saw from him in the past. For years, he justified almost everything he did. He could always find a reason why his actions made sense. But as his story unfolded, it became clear that he was beginning to see the damage that his choices had caused, not only to others, but also to himself and the people he loved most. His escape from Steinmauer could have easily been written as another classic Valentin move. Years ago, I would have expected him to disappear into the shadows, create a new identity, and spend the rest of his life staying one step ahead of the authorities. Instead, what followed was surprisingly emotional. The time he spent hiding at Carly's home showed a version of Valentin that felt more human than ever before. What fascinated me about those scenes was how much trust and caution existed between them at the same time. Carly understood better than most people that Valentin was capable of deception. She knew his history. She knew the risks. Yet she also saw the man he was becoming. That tension created some of the most believable moments in the story. Trust wasn't handed to him simply because he wanted it. He had to earn every small piece of it. As the weeks passed, I found myself noticing something unusual. Valentin wasn't focused on power anymore. He wasn't plotting revenge. He wasn't trying to build another empire. He seemed more concerned with protecting the people around him than protecting himself. For a character who once put his own goals above nearly everything else, that change felt enormous. Then came the turning point that, in my opinion, completed his transformation. His decision to surrender himself in order to save Jocelyn was not just a heroic act, it was the ultimate test of whether he had truly changed. Anyone can say they are a better person. Anyone can talk about redemption. The real question is, what happens when sacrifice becomes necessary? The Valentin from 10 years ago would never have made that choice. He would have searched for another option. He would have found a loophole. He would have convinced himself that his freedom mattered more than someone else's safety. This version of Valentin did the exact opposite. He knowingly walked toward consequences that he had every reason to fear because someone else's life mattered more than his own comfort. That is the moment when redemption stopped being a storyline and became a reality. Of course, the emotional heart of everything came in his final moments with Charlotte. I have to admit those scenes were difficult to watch, not because they were poorly written, but because they felt painfully real. Anyone who has ever loved a child could understand the heartbreak in that room. What touched me most was the way Valentin spoke to Charlotte. He wasn't trying to appear strong. He wasn't pretending everything would be fine. He wasn't making promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he gave her honesty. In many ways, that was the greatest gift he could offer. For years, Valentin's life was built on secrets, half-truths, and manipulation. Yet, when it mattered most, he chose honesty. He wanted Charlotte to understand why he had to leave. He wanted her to know that doing the right thing sometimes comes with a painful price. Most importantly, he wanted her to learn that true courage is not avoiding consequences, but facing them. As I watched that goodbye unfold, I couldn't stop thinking about how different this father was from the man who first arrived in Port Charles. The Valentin who once frightened people now stood before his daughter, trying to teach her compassion, responsibility, and strength. That's an incredible transformation when you really think about it. The emotion in Charlotte's reaction made the scene even more heartbreaking. You could feel how deeply she loved her father and how terrified she was of losing him. There was no villain and no hero in that moment. There was only a father and daughter facing an impossible goodbye. Those are the kinds of scenes that stay with viewers long after the credits roll. Looking at the bigger picture, I believe Valentin's redemption arc worked because it wasn't rushed. The writers allowed us to see every stage of the journey. We witnessed his cruelty, his selfishness, his mistakes, his regrets, his attempts to change, and finally his willingness to sacrifice himself for others. That gradual evolution made every emotional moment feel earned. By the end of these episodes, I wasn't thinking about Valentin the Cassadine. I wasn't thinking about the mastermind, the fugitive, or the former villain. I was thinking about a man who finally understood what truly mattered. Family, responsibility, love. Those simple values guided his final choices in a way that power and ambition never could. For me, his redemption story feels complete, not because he became perfect, but because he accepted accountability. That's what separates real redemption from empty apologies. He stopped running, he stopped blaming others, he chose to carry the burden himself so innocent people would not have to suffer. Now all I can do is hope that this isn't the final chapter for him. After everything Valentin has endured, and after all the growth we've witnessed, I would love to see him earn another chance. A chance to sit across from Carly again, a chance to hug Charlotte without wondering if it will be the last time, a chance to build a future instead of constantly running from the past. And honestly, if someone had told me years ago that I'd be rooting this hard for Valentin Cassadine, I would have said they were crazy, yet here we are. That's the power of a truly well-told redemption story. It doesn't just change the character, it changes the way we feel about him too.